Saturday afternoon. Away from those areas, actually, Scotland and Northern England stay cold and generally grey, but mostly dry. And towards the southeast, we'll see some warm sunshine. But into Saturday night, most places turn cloudy once again. And as the cloud thickens up from the west, bringing with it mist and murk, we'll also see outbreaks of rain. On and off rain, yes, but nevertheless, a fairly wet start to Sunday across western parts of the UK, especially western Scotland, where it's going to be persistent first thing. And as that rain moves northeastwards, it's going to stay damp across the north of Scotland through much of the afternoon. Elsewhere, the rain breaking up into showers, and there'll be some slow-moving downpours once again, especially northern and western England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Monday's showers mainly affect the southeast. It's going to be warm again.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Coronation is an event that has remained virtually unchanged for 1,000 years.
And we invite you to join us here on GB News for this historic event.
All next week, we'll be talking to you in towns and cities across the country.
Building up to the main event on Saturday.
From pageantry at the palace to unearthing the history of this ancient ritual.
Come celebrate with us.
The coronation of King Charles III, Saturday, May the 6th. Join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Well, hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry and this is Dewbs & Co. Coming up tonight. It's all going on, isn't it? You've still got strikes, you've got some people accepting pay deals, some people pushing for more. You've got one of the chief economists at the Bank of England telling us basically we've all got to get used to being a little bit poorer. So I'm asking you tonight a simple question. Do you think it's reasonable for people to expect inflation matching pay rises? Yes or no? And we'll all remember the scheme that was set up for the Ukrainian refugees very quickly, very effectively in lots of places. I'm pondering tonight, do we need a similar scheme for the situation in Sudan? Yes or no? And you've just been seeing there a promo for the coronation. Many people looking forward to it. Many other people are saying, what a waste of money. We don't need the royals. What we need in this country is an elected head of state. Goodness me, what says you? Is that the way forward for this country? Or long live the monarchy? And I read an awful story today about a veteran that ended his own life because he felt he was passed from pillar to post and couldn't get enough help with his mental health. So I'll finally leave you with a simple question. Do we fail our veterans in this country? We're going to get into all of that, but before we do, let's bring ourselves up to speed with tonight's latest headlines.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. And our top story tonight, Richard Sharp has resigned as chairman of the BBC after a report found that he breached the rules for public appointments. The review says he failed to properly disclose his involvement in facilitating an £800,000 loan guarantee for Boris Johnson. Mr Sharp says the breach was inadvertent, but he's quitting to prioritise the interests of the broadcaster. Liberal Democrats leader Sir Ed Davies says the appointment process needs to be changed.
I prefer an independent process, and I absolutely believe there should be a hearing to check the appointment by the cross-party select committee in the House of Commons for culture, media and sport. That's the only way forward, so people can have confidence. Just allowing it to be the Prime Minister say so just won't work anymore.
Well, Rishi Sunak does not agree. He says the right process was followed.
This is about doing things properly and professionally, and when concerns are raised, it's right that there is a proper process, an independent process, that we don't prejudge, we allow it to carry on, establish the facts of what happened, reach a conclusion. That's happened. Richard Sharp has resigned, but it's right that we do these things properly and professionally. I think most people will think that's the right thing to do.
Police investigating the murder of a pregnant teacher in Scotland have confirmed that they found the body of her missing partner. Officers had been looking for 36-year-old David Yates in connection with the death of Morel Sturrock at her home in Glasgow on Tuesday. She was 29 weeks pregnant and her unborn baby did not survive. Mr Yates's remains were found after searches of Mugdock Reservoir, which is located north of Glasgow. His death is not being treated as suspicious. Unions representing teachers and head teachers in England say they plan to take coordinated strike action in the autumn after accusing the government of wanting education on the cheap. The General Secretaries of 4 education unions have announced that they will work together in their long-running dispute over pay. It's after they rejected the government's offer of a one-off payment of £1,000 and an average pay rise of 4.5% next year. The National Association of Head Teachers says the decision sends a clear signal to the government that the dispute is not going away. Well, members of the GMB union have accepted the government's pay offer to health workers of a 5% pay rise and a one-off cash sum. GMB officials say they will now vote to accept the offer at a meeting next week of the NHS Staff Council. Health Secretary Steve Barclay says the deal recognises the outstanding job that NHS staff do whilst protecting the government's commitment to halve inflation. In Sudan, the ceasefire between the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces and the army has been extended for a further 3 days. The Foreign Secretary is calling on the two sides to fully implement the truce and says evacuation flights are ongoing. So far, British forces have rescued almost 900 people. The government is urging those with British passports and visas to make their way to the airfield as quickly as possible.
What we have seen over the past 24 hours or so is a significant decline in the British nationals coming forward. Now, that's what you'd expect. It's what's happened with other countries. So what we are saying now is that people should expect within the next 24 hours, so by 6 o'clock UK time tomorrow, for us to cease those flights.
Deputy Prime Minister there, Oliver Dowden. Now, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has met with Foreign Secretary James Cleverly in London. The UK visit is the last leg of the Republican's international tour aimed at enhancing his foreign policy credentials. Yesterday, he was in Israel. It's expected that Mr. DeSantis will run for the Republican nomination in the 2024 presidential election. At least 17 people have been killed as Russian airstrikes hit key cities across Ukraine. Well, 2 children are among those killed and 9 people have been taken to hospital. The attacks come as Ukraine is set to launch an offensive with new military equipment supplied by Western allies. It follows a winter offensive where Moscow has made little headway. The government says the UK is being vigilant in the North Sea after alleged Russian spy ships were seen operating near offshore energy infrastructure. Baroness Goldie says the activities of Russian vessels are being watched closely. Earlier this month, a joint investigation by European broadcasters claimed that a Russian citizen was part of an operation to map undersea infrastructure. The report found that the ship was sailing around the Baltic and North Seas for a month, passing wind farms off the coast of several Scandinavian countries. Hollywood actress Eva Green has won a $1 million lawsuit over the collapse of a sci-fi film. And a warning for those watching on television, the following footage does contain flashing images. The star sued White Lantern Films, the company behind A Patriot, after the project collapsed in 2019. She was due to play a lead role in that movie. The 42-year-old says she's entitled to £810,000 after the company said that Ms. Green undermined the independent film's production. And the Prince and Princess of Wales have paid an emotional visit to a Welsh village to remember the victims of the 1966 Aberfan disaster. 116 children and 28 adults were killed after a colliery spoil tip collapsed onto a school and neighbouring homes. William and Kate visited the Aberfan Memorial Garden to pay their respects. It's the first time that the royal couple has been to the village. On TV, online, on DAB+ radio and on TuneIn 2, this is GB News. Back now to Michelle.
Thanks for that. Well, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through till 7 o'clock this evening. Alongside me, I've got Charlotte Pickles, the director of Reform Think Tank, and Paul Embry, fireman, trade unionist and author. Hello, welcome back, everyone. And you know the drill, don't you, on Dewbs & Co? It's not just about us three, it's very much about you at home as well. What's on your mind tonight? You can get in touch with me all the usual ways. GBViews at gbnews.uk is the email, or you can tweet me at GBNews. Con's been in touch and said, Michelle, haven't you got anything positive to talk about tonight? Any positive stories tonight? No. Do you know any? This is a conversation that I have all the time, and I've often had it with you, the viewers, because the news, it can be very often doom and gloom, and I seek high and low, I do, to look for positive, uplifting stories, and they are very few and far between. So, Con, if you know something that I don't, and there is a monumental, positive, happy story that I've overlooked tonight, do get in touch and tell me. Do you two know of any?
My football team, Wolves, are on the up. They're playing really well at the moment. I suspect most viewers and listeners are not going to be much interested in that, but it's big for me, Michelle. You
just said your football team, Wolves, didn't you? I thought for a brief second you said my 14 Wolves are up. I was thinking, who is this guy? Why has he got 14 Wolves? What's going on? Yeah. What about you? Anything positive?
You often ask me this, and I can't think of things on the spot. Although some
controversial take maybe, might think the coronation and the street parties and the
yes,
celebrations is a positive thing.
Yes, there you go. And I'm going to come to that. Yes, some. This is a question for a bit later on in the programme. Are you into the monarchy? Will you be celebrating the coronation, or are you on the other side of the fence, perhaps saying it's all a waste of money? Give us an elected head of state. Your thoughts. We'll be coming to that a little bit later in the programme. I've got positive news. We beat Sky News again in the ratings last night. So thank you to all of you guys that do keep us company at 6 o'clock on Dewbs and Co. That's nice and positive. I always think that's a nice upbeat thing. And I'll throw it open to you. Have you got anything that you feel happy and upbeat about? Get in touch all the usual ways. But for now, let's move on, shall we? Because you will have noticed by now that we're seeing yet more strike action, yet more talks of strikes. And we're seeing a variety of things happening with unions, aren't we? For example, some people accepting the pay offers, others pushing for more, others pushing for quite eye-watering sums over and above inflation, quite frankly. We've had it all going on, haven't we? The chief economist, or one of them at the Bank of England, saying basically we've all got to get used to being a little bit poorer. Sir, I've got a simple question. Do you think inflation matching, let's not worry for the moment about overinflation, but inflation matching pay rises a realistic thing to demand?
Yeah, I think it is, because I think when you look at the inflation that we're experiencing at the moment, it's not coming from wages. We're not seeing a wage price spiral. What we're seeing is a price-wage spiral. What we're seeing is workers responding in their wage requests or demands, call it what you will, to the economic landscape. And the inflation that we've got has largely been caused as a result of the opening up of the economy after the pandemic, as a result of the war in Ukraine. But there's another facet to it that people rarely talk about, which is naked profiteering that is going on at the moment. We are seeing companies whacking up their prices in an attempt to increase their profits, when actually there's no real justification for them doing it. And even as energy and gas and oil prices are now starting to tumble, you're still seeing some of those companies maintaining their prices. So what I think we're seeing is something that some pundits have coined as greedflation. And instead of arguing that the onus should be on workers to show wage restraint and to accept a fall in real wages and a fall in living standards, perhaps the responsibility should be on some of these big companies to show a bit of profit restraint.
Yeah, and we've debated this very topic. Keen viewers will know about greedflation. I am a capitalist, but I do favour responsible capitalism. And I think what's going on at the moment with profiteering in some cases is quite irresponsible. But, and don't worry everyone, I won't open this can of worms again, I do think everyone demanding all these long lockdowns and all these companies, they did have hits to their profits in some instances. So now some of them are trying to claw it back, but don't worry, I won't open my COVID can of worms. Let's bring it back on track. The pay rise, inflation levels, do you think that's reasonable for people to want? Well, you can want whatever you want, but do you think it's a reasonable thing to actually be looking to receive?
So I think it's a very rational thing to ask for. As Paul's saying, as we all are very aware, there are very large numbers of people who are really struggling to, not to particularly live a luxurious life, but just to pay basic bills. So I think it's very rational. Do I think it's reasonable? I think this is a really difficult question to answer, because if you're on a low income and you are struggling, then it probably is quite reasonable to expect to have a bit more of a generous pay settlement. If actually you're on a slightly higher salary or even a high salary, then actually I'm not sure it is quite as reasonable to be asking for that. And I think, ultimately, whether it's in the public sector or the private sector or for charities, which is another category we often don't talk about, where they're clearly not able to, profiteer or do anything else that's going to get more money in, there has to be some constraint because they have to pay bills. And therefore, I'm not sure it is always reasonable to expect that you can get an inflation matching pay rise. Certainly, my organisation is a small charity. I wouldn't be able to afford to pay the full inflation amount. I was as generous as I could be. But I do think the point about companies behaving badly and using high inflation as an excuse to raise prices, in fact, well beyond the inflation impact. We have a newspaper subscription. I will not name the newspaper, but it is a very mainstream newspaper, who have just put up their prices by 25%. And when I asked them how they justified that, they just said, oh, well, HQ are requiring that because of inflation. Well, that's 2.5 times inflation, so that's not a reasonable price rise. So I think there is definitely something in that.
Well, the government never criticises, businesses and companies who decide to put their prices up for the reasons they cite. Well, we're living in the world of inflation, our overheads, our costs have gone up, therefore we've got to pass that on to the customer. Now, what the government says is, OK, that's entirely rational, that's what happens in business. But the same principle applies, surely, to a worker. If a worker is experiencing a fall in living standards as a result of rampant inflation, then it's entirely reasonable for that worker to say, well, do you know what, my labour charge has gone up because I'm being hit by higher costs, and therefore it's reasonable for me to be able to meet those costs. I have to put up my labour charge. And what the government says in the first case is, well, we have to accept that businesses will put prices up. It's entirely reasonable and rational thing to do. But in the second case, they say, oh, well, no, that's outrageous. The worker shouldn't put his or her labour charge up. No, that's unreasonable. The worker's got to show restraint. What does the worker think he's doing? In an age of inflation, demanding inflation levelling pay increases. And that is the hypocrisy, I think, at the heart of conservative philosophy when it comes to the distinction they draw, the unfair distinction they draw, particularly in a scenario like this one with inflation, between business and between workers.
I'm not sure that is entirely fair, as you might expect me to say, because I think there are different things that are being conflated there. So actually, there'll be plenty of people in the government. Indeed, there have been plenty of people in the government who have been criticising some companies relying on, for example, welfare top-ups rather than paying decent wages that people can live on. You've got to remember this was also the government that has just significantly increased the national living wage. So I don't think that is entirely fair. I also don't think you've got a government that's going around saying, companies can whack up whatever prices they want. And actually, in this scenario, it's the Bank of England, which is an independent entity, that is telling people that they should be more restrained in the wage
but the bank, one of the reasons that the Bank of England are doing this, they've literally got one job, the Bank of England, essentially, which is to keep inflation to its 2% target.
Absolutely.
It failed monumentally. So instead of actually sitting there looking inwards and going, you know what, you rumbled me, I failed at my job, what they're actually doing is get your fault, and by the way, it's definitely your fault as well.
That's a problem with handing control of monetary policy to the Bank of England and saying, as you said, Michelle, your only job is essentially price stability, because they will then see everything through the prism of price stability. What does that mean? It means holding down wages. It means whacking up interest rates if necessary. What does that mean for demand in the economy? What does it mean for investment? What does it mean for businesses to be able to thrive and borrow money? What does it mean for competitiveness? Even if all of those things take a hit, as long as the Monetary Policy Committee can say, well, we've done our job because we've hit the inflation target, then that's ultimately all they're interested in. That's why we need, in my view, control of monetary policy restored to democratic control of government.
Even aside from whatever your view is of the independence of the Bank of England, and we won't get into the market volatility that we saw when there were suggestions not long ago that might change, but certainly the markets did not respond well, which does have implications for people's wages, for people's ability to pay mortgages, etc. So there's a knock-on impact of that. But setting that aside, as you pointed out, this cost of living crisis we're in was totally foreseeable because of the pent-up demand that was created in the pandemic. Totally foreseeable. And the Bank of England did nothing to try and get ahead of what has happened. So even if let's set aside the debate of the independence and just say, well, that was their job. They have. You're right. They've absolutely failed on taking action in a timely manner to try and prevent this.
Then will there be any accountability for that failure? No, there will not.
My concern as well is
Make it a brief concern, because I want to ask you about something else.
Really brief. We've got a stagnant economy. The economy's flatlining. We could potentially tip into a recession at one point. The last thing we should be doing is reducing people's disposable incomes. What we need to do is get real wages rising, keep demand high, because the last thing we want is that vicious circle where we see low growth or no growth, and then all of a sudden we see unemployment, businesses laying people off because they're not making any profits, higher welfare claims. That's the sort of thing that we need to avoid. And we should have learned the lessons, frankly, from the 1930s about how you avoid, serious recessions. But it seems that we're still, even all these years later, making those same mistakes.
Richard says, oh, Michelle, you're talking about greedflation, but what you're talking about here is capitalism. And he says there's pros and cons to it, but he says it is the best system that there is. One of the things that caught my eye yesterday, whenever it was, is the RMT holding a strike on, I think it's a Eurovision final, the day of the Eurovision final. Now, I will hold my hands up. I am not a Eurovision viewer. It's not my kind of thing.
Good.
No, I'm not. But it's not for me, the whole Eurovision thing. But notwithstanding that, there is a war in Ukraine. In this country, we've extended the hands of everything, really. Money, homes, all the rest of it. Apparently, we're on the shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine. We're doing absolutely everything to help them and all the rest of it, including hosting the Eurovision, because it wasn't safe to do so in Ukraine. When I then look at the RMT trying to then disrupt people that are into the Eurovision, that do want to be in Liverpool to celebrate, all the rest of it, what do you think to that? Do you think it's a good move to stop people trying to be part of that?
I think the problem is, Michelle, if you can call a strike on any day in this country and there will always be something happening. There will always be an event going on somewhere that is going to be impacted by the strike, let's be blunt. And so in many respects, unions are in a no-win situation. I mean, I've been on strike.
But this seems to me very much like a deliberate targeting of that event, that you're targeting an event that we're hosting on behalf of a war-torn country.
Well, let me say this. Even if it is, then I think we would all have to understand, look, if you are a union and you're trying to maximise pressure on your employer to make a reasonable offer before you take strike action, you are going to employ tactics that increase your leverage to the maximum amount, aren't you? You can't expect any union to say, OK, we're going to take strike
with
action.
With no morality?
Well, I don't...
Because don't you think it feels like a little bit wrong? And I have to say, I'm not into Eurovision. I am not sitting here defending Eurovision. It's not my thing, but for a lot of people, it is their thing. And it is quite symbolic that this year, at the cost of tens of millions, I think it's going to be costing the BBC, something like that, we have generously hosted this event on behalf of this war-torn country. Someone, Con, at the start of the show says there's nothing positive going on at the moment in this world. There is a big positive thing. The union wants to disrupt it for its own ends. Well, I think that is pretty selfish.
By definition, taking strike action is disruptive. There will always be a level of disruption.
There's levels. So why did they cancel? Because weren't they planning to do something on the coronation weekend?
Well, but look...
But then they decided to cancel it.
Unions will always decide tactics that they think, as I said before, will maximise their leverage. That is not unreasonable. Just as, by the way, employers in response will always choose their own tactics, which try to undermine the leverage of the union. Now, of course, what unions have to do is make sure that when they set strike dates or employ tactics, they don't alienate the public too much, because then public support collapses and they could end up losing the dispute. So this is obviously a judgment called by the RMT. But
well, I'll throw it open to you to be the judge of. Don't forget as well, and I know it's not RMT before you start getting in touch saying I don't know what I'm talking about, but ASLEF, the FA Cup as well. It looks like that will be disrupted. Are you a football fan? Does that matter to you or not? Your thoughts in all the usual ways. When I come back, I'll have some of your responses to that. But I also want to ask you, we were talking about Ukraine then. We opened a big, generous scheme, didn't we, to help people take refuge in this country from Ukraine because of that conflict. Well, we're very aware now there is another conflict in Sudan. Do you think then that we should set up a similar scheme, similar scale as well, perhaps, for the Sudanese people that are affected? Or not? See you in 2.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, keeping you company on this Friday night till 7 o'clock tonight. Charlotte Pickles is the director of Reform Think Tank, and Paul Emery is a firefighter and author. Welcome back, everybody. We were just talking then about pay rises. Your thoughts on all of that? Rob says, "Wake up, England!" What about everywhere else? But he directs it to England. He says, we spent our way out of the pandemic. There's a war raging on the doorsteps of Europe. Basically, he says, we've got to basically buckle down and strap ourselves in, I think. He thinks, I'm paraphrasing a bit, Rob, for time reasons, but I think what he's saying is, no, we shouldn't be expecting these humongous pay rises. Mag says, empathetically, no. You can't have these big pay rises. Love to, but no, we can't afford it. Fred says, all of this is caused by the government's obsession with net zero. Elisa says, what about very low pay workers, care workers, who haven't been able to go on strike? They always get forgotten about. Simon says, Paul is very right about inflation. Well said. Paul says, the RMT are doing a great public service to the British people by disrupting Eurovision. Not a fan of Eurovision then, I take it. Keep your thoughts coming in. Let's move on, shall we? Sudanese refugees face being criminalised and deporting from the UK, apparently, because there are no safe and legal routes. People have now been saying it's time for a scheme to be set up that was similar in speed and breadth and all the rest of it for the same kind of conflict, well, a conflict, not the same, but you know what I mean, that was taking place in Ukraine. So that's my question. I'll start with you, Charlotte. Do you think we need that same kind of scheme now?
I think it's problematic to create specific schemes for specific conflicts. And so, for example, actually, if you think about the Afghan schemes that we put in place, they were not actually for, you know, any Afghani to be able to come across. It was specifically for those Afghans who had worked with the British out there. And we didn't create a specific route, despite the fact that for many of the people living now in Afghanistan, the circumstances are horrific. Yes, we did for Ukraine. If we do for Sudan, will we do that for every other country where there's a particular conflict? So I think...
But what's the line then? So why Ukraine? Why pick that one? Is it because what?
I assume it's because... Well, I don't know why the government gave the rationale for it. I assume there's probably several factors, including a invasion of a country, which is obviously not the case in Sudan, a horrendous situation in Sudan, but it's a different type of situation. I imagine it has got something to do with the fact that, as you said, or as I think your viewer pointed out, you know, the war on the doorstep of Europe, I imagine there were considerations of, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I imagine there were several factors that went into that. I think the real point here is we should be a compassionate nation. We, of course, should be taking people who are fleeing abuse, violence, who are terrified for their lives. We should have a system that works rather than thinking each time we have to create new types of schemes. So, of course, there should be safe and legal routes for Sudanese citizens to be able to apply to come to the UK.
Just to give you some context, by the way, I think it was about 160,000 Ukrainians use these schemes. Paul, your thoughts?
I'm sympathetic to the idea. I mean, we've got a ceasefire in Sudan, which I think is likely to expire today, and the predictions are that the violence is going to intensify. I mean, the violence so far has been pretty horrendous, and you see pictures of people in those circumstances and refugees fleeing and so on. And it strikes me that this is exactly the type of scenario, really, that the principle of the resettlement schemes was kind of created for in the first place. So I don't necessarily think that it's unreasonable to say that as a Western nation, we should be willing to take a modest number of those refugees. What do
you call a modest number?
Well, I guess that's for others to say. But
no, I'm asking you. You've just said a modest number. I'm asking what you mean.
But these things these figures can't be plucked out of the air. You know, you need to think these things through. But you know, let's say, for example, a few thousand, I think wouldn't be unreasonable. But the thing I think as well is look, Sudan shares a land border with Libya. Now we know that in terms of some of the heavy numbers of migrants that have been coming into Italy and then moving on throughout Europe. They've been originating from Libya, and a number of those people, of course, have ended up coming across the channel in the small boats. So the truth is that if we don't agree to take a number of these refugees, there's a chance that they may end up getting here anyway through the mechanism that we're trying to prevent. But yeah, look, I mean, we would need to also make sure there are proper dispersal policies in place if they do arrive. I think we've been terrible at that in the past in terms of dispersal policies, in terms of integration policies. We've effectively had a policy that says, you know, if people come here and their asylum claim is granted, then essentially crack on, you know, get on with it. You'll live anywhere, and we won't invest in local public services to make sure that the infrastructure can cope. We won't do anything around, you know, employment. We won't do much in terms of integration policies. We've been terrible at that as a country in the past, and that is something I think that would need to happen alongside.
But I can almost hear quite a few people shouting. I can hear you all the way here, and they'll be shouting at the screen saying, "But this is all, you know, we've got so many people already UK citizens that struggle to get onto the housing ladder, that are waiting for homes to be made available from the councils or whatever. You've got so many people using food banks. You've got hotels absolutely brimming. You're talking about cruise ships or whatever they're called. Well, not a cruise ship. What was that? What was that
Barges.
thing? A barge, that's it. A little bit less glamorous than a cruise ship.
This is exactly the problem, Michelle, because the system is broken, and the system has been broken for many years. And because the system is so obviously broken, it means that the general public out there, by and large, have lost faith in the system. Yeah. And therefore, you know, if you had a properly managed, properly regulated immigration system where numbers were modest and manageable, people would be much more up for schemes like this one. But because they've got no faith in the system...
Well, it comes down to, ultimately, most people are good, decent people. No one would really want anyone to be suffering in any way, shape or form. But I guess it does come down to should the UK then take on the role, if you like, of the kind of asylum offerer for all global conflicts? Why stop at Sudan? We just mentioned Ukraine. We're talking about Sudan. Where next? Because there are an awful lot of conflicts happening all over the world, and unfortunately, you don't really see the end of them often, and ones pop up all the time, it feels like, doesn't it? Your thoughts on that, GB Views at gbnews.uk is how you can reach me on the email. Let's talk the royals, though, shall we, after the break? What do you think? Coronation coming up. Are you wholeheartedly behind our king? Yes. Or do you think, actually, it's time now? The monarchy has had its day. Let's have an elected head of state. See you in 2.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm keeping you company right through till 7 o'clock tonight. Lots of you getting in contact about that last topic as well. I'm asking you, should we have a scheme that's similar, if you like, to the Ukrainian one for the situation in Sudan? And by the way, if we do that, why just stop at Sudan? Why not open up those schemes then for pretty much any conflict in the world? Should that be the way forward for the UK? Many of you pointing out the obvious, which was what we were just mentioning there. Mark says, Michelle, where do you think all the infrastructure is going to come from? Houses, schools and doctors. Often the thought is just given to how do you get people in with no thought to the kind of situation of them living beyond that. Simon says, would absolutely love to help everybody in need from all over the world, but he says we don't live in a perfect world. Keep your thoughts coming in. I'm going to come on to the coronation before the end of the programme. I want to know whether or not you support the monarchy or whether or not you're more in favour of an elected head of state. But before I do that, I want to talk about something that I know is very passionate to a lot of you at home, which is veterans. All those brave men and women that have put their own lives kind of on the line, really, to help keep all of us as safe as possible. A story caught my eye of yet another veteran, a young lad, 26-year-old Drew Howie was called, father of 3. He very sadly ended his life after feeling like he was passed from pillar to post when it came to getting help for his mental health. And it really, these stories always kind of stare me inside, Paul, because I look at it and it fills me with a bit of shame, really, because yes, I know people struggle, and yes, I want everyone to have all the mental health care that they need, and I know, you know, a lot of people don't get that. But there's something about veterans lives. They risk their lives to keep us safe, to protect us. They're often maimed and all the rest of it. And I feel like we fail them.
We do. They're willing to make the ultimate sacrifice, and it strikes me that we don't treat them anything like as well as we ought to treat them when they arrive back on Civvy Street. I mean, often these people are broken, because of the experiences that they've gone through, suffering post-traumatic stress disorder and so on. Many of them become homeless. And when you think of the skills and the knowledge and the wisdom that they acquire in their role as soldiers, sailors, Air Force or whatever, it seems to me that actually, especially with the skills gap we've got in the country at the moment, that those skills that they've got could be put to such good use in industry throughout the wider economy and so on. And also, having career pathways, I think, into teaching and things like that. I mean, I think it would be great if veterans had a very clear career pathway into teaching and then being placed in some of perhaps our tough inner city schools where I think they could probably instill a bit of discipline.
God, can you imagine?
Kids a thing or
but
I think it'd be a really good idea.
But then can you imagine what happened then is half the parents will start crying because their kid is now finally having to deal with a bit of discipline.
I don't think so. I think that actually when you speak to most parents, I think they like their kids to have discipline instilled in schools. I think there is a minority, possibly a growing minority, that now seeks to always blame the school and my Johnny would never act like that, how dare you. But by and large, I think most parents still like the idea of discipline schools, like the idea of a bit of regimentation, and think actually it's good for their kids as well.
Are you a veteran at home? Do you feel well supported? Jim says, I am a military veteran with CPTSD. What is that?
PTSD, I think he means post-traumatic stress
disorder.
disorder.
But he puts a C in front of it. Chronic, right. Anyway, he's got CPTSD, so chronic post-traumatic stress disorder. He said he's had it for many years. He does not feel at all like he's supported. He says, we've served our country, and he feels like he gets a kick in the teeth in return. That's Jim. Charlotte, your thoughts?
I mean, I would agree with what Paul has said, and Michelle, you're saying, which is that these are people who've literally been willing to lay down their lives for our safety, freedom, however you want to put it. You read these stories like this young father, and it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking that that didn't need to happen if the services had been in place, if he'd been able to act. He actively tried to seek support. This wasn't someone
and that's a very brave thing to do,
It
by the way.
really is, and particularly, I think, perhaps if you come from a slightly, I don't know the circumstances of this individual, but, maybe you come from a slightly more macho background, or maybe that's not, you don't talk about your feelings, and it's not, to actually reach out and say, I think I'm a danger to myself, I'm really struggling. That, I mean, it shows huge courage to do that, and then to find that you go somewhere and they say, oh, you need to see someone else, and then be told, oh no, you need to see someone else, and you just think
it is demoralising. And it's enough to, because I think that first step of asking for help, it's quite a big step, and I think if you don't get almost like understood,
the response immediately,
if you don't get understood, I think it can for a lot of people make you recoil back inside and go, do you know what, don't worry about it kind of thing, and then inward you go, which is not a good place to be.
I did just want to reflect slightly, though, on this particular case, in that the reporting of it says that the young man had a breakdown whilst he was still in the forces, and that he had suggested himself that perhaps he was suffering from PTSD, and he hadn't been given a diagnosis. Clearly, he wasn't referred at that point to the right services and support. So this isn't just, at that point he was actively serving the country and couldn't access the support. Never mind having left the services, being ex-military and needing to do that transition to civilian life and access services. So I think it's more than just post-serving. I think it's also about how we're supporting people before they leave and making sure they have the services.
And I think, Charlie, there's a danger that nowadays we simply don't recognise when somebody has a serious clinical mental health problem, because the whole thing around mental health, and this is a slightly wider debate, mental health has become, and you know, mental health conditions have become so ubiquitous now. It's almost like a fashion accessory. You know, normal everyday feelings are being categorised as mental health deficiencies. And so when you do have a genuine case like this come along, someone with clinical mental health problems, how do you distinguish between that and somebody who claims to but doesn't really? I think that's a problem for us.
Gareth says, hey team, I'm a veteran and a teacher. He says discipline does not work. It's a wild world out there, he says, in education. The parents don't like it. He said the kids say certain words to that I can't repeat at tea time, but he's not having a good experience, as Gareth, he says he's now moved on.
And you're from Hull, so they must be bad if you can't repeat.
Oh, they don't make my eyes water. I'm just being protective of my audience who might be having tea with their kids. So no, it doesn't bother me. I've said far worse, I can show you. Anyway, veterans, more respect for veterans and all the pensioners, says Richard as well. What about them? They all fought for our freedoms, he says, as well. Keep your thoughts coming in on that one. George says, I am a veteran and I've had no support at all and I don't want to live anymore. He says, I've had enough. George, that makes me very sad indeed. And I think kudos for you for admitting you feel like that. And I do hope that you can try and get help. I've been in that place. It's not a nice place and I live to tell the tale, so things can change and things can get better. Someone else has just been in touch saying the C in what we just said earlier, it stands for complex.
Oh, right.
Apparently, you learn something new every day. That's Will that's just corrected us there. Anyway, going to take a quick break. When we come back, more of your thoughts, but also let's get into the Royal, shall we? That's positive, isn't it? Uplifting this weekend. No, it's not this weekend, it's next weekend, isn't it? Yes, the coronation. I'm wishing my time away. The King. Do you sit there and are you going to have parties and all the rest of it, raise a glass, or do you sit there and go, what a waste of money? Give us an elected head of state. Tell me your thoughts.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company until 7 o'clock tonight. Charlotte Pickles is the director of Reform think tank and Paul Embry is the firefighter and an author. It was all going on in the break, ladies and gents, because Paul Embry's mate sent a text message in asking Charlotte out on a date. It was all going on, wasn't it? Charlotte played.
I'm sure he'd be delighted to just
yeah.
What's your friend's name?
My mate's name is Joe.
Hey,
I should
Joe.
say to Joe, God bless him, she said yes if she wasn't otherwise engaged.
Oh, yes.
Unfortunately, so it has to be a no.
But hey, Joe, I admire your bottle, I do.
Yeah,
and,
Michelle said she's up
good.
for it, by the way.
No, she didn't. I said I admire
You could have
his
a
bottle.
dating segment at the end of the show, dating segment for people to kind of, message in and say.
Good call.
Yeah,
Be a matchmaker,
right.
that's good news.
Yes, shall I move on then and actually do what I'm supposed to be doing rather than setting everybody up? Apparently, only 3 in 10 Britons think that monarchy is very important. Just 3 in 10? I think that's quite low. Do you agree with that? Apparently, it's all about different generations. 12% of 18 to 34-year-olds believe they're very important, compared with 42% of those aged 55 and older. I shall start with you, Paul Embry. I've poured myself a Prosecco. I'm getting into the coronation spirit a little bit early. Are you into the coronation, into the royals?
I won't mind the coronation. I mean, I don't mind these sorts of events. I think they are quite unifying. I'm not a royalist. I do describe myself
Get out.
as no, JD, that Prosecco's going to come
I know,
my way.
I've just poured an ice drink. I was about to get into it all.
I do describe myself as a Republican, but a very mild one, actually. I mean, I have nothing personally against the royal family. They do not have the sort of life that I would like for all the luxury and splendour and the pomp and the privilege. Having that kind of goldfish bowl existence is not one that I would particularly want. I just think, in a grown-up democracy, you should be allowed to elect your head of state. I think we should have the freedom to do that in Britain in the same way that they do elsewhere. I don't ultimately think that realistically it makes a huge amount of difference if you're an advanced democracy and your country kind of functions in a proper way. Arguably ours doesn't at the moment. I don't think it makes a huge difference whether you're a monarchy or a republic. You can compare, for example, some Western countries, Denmark, which is a monarchy, Iceland, which isn't. They're both relatively stable, relatively peaceful, relatively democratic countries, and still would be if they swapped their republican kind of governance with their monarchical government. So let's elect our head of state. And if Charles wants to stand in that election, let him do
Well, I was just about to ask you who would you have, but anyway, before I do that, Charlotte, thoughts?
I'm a total hypocrite because in any other walk of life, I would say you have to earn your position in something. But I am definitely a royalist. And I can't work out really why it is I have this sort of, internal conflict. But I think it is something to do with the fact that it's such a part of the kind of national identity for me. And I think it is a bit different. We had, obviously, the Queen for so long, and she was such a big, everybody would be able to remember different things that happened, and that she was obviously not a direct part of, but moments in time where she was present. And I think that is important for unifying the country. You think of the Jubilees, you think of the marriage, the royal marriages, things like that. They really are a moment for the whole nation to come together.
You're not going to get an invitation to the coronation.
Really?
Yeah,
I thought I was doing quite well.
Never say never.
But what I would say though is I do not understand the argument of saying, even if you want to get rid of the monarchy, which I absolutely categorically do not, I still don't get the idea of why you'd then want to have an elected head of state, because why wouldn't you just essentially say that's what the Prime Minister is? I just don't think it makes much difference.
Well, lots of you are getting in touch. Eric says, please can we keep the monarchy because they are non-political. Do you think that? Glyn says, basically, we cannot class ourselves as a true democracy until we've got a democratically elected president. Lots of you are saying that basically you see that the royals are basically the fabric of this country, and without it, what would we become? Some of you are asking. Louise said we would be...
More democratic.
Well, we would be a poorer country.
They don't have any control over decisions in politics or democracy.
Well, I mean, the monarch in this country it still has power in the sense of, you know, being able to declare war, sign treaties, appoint bishops and lords and so on. And it's true that that's devolved to the Prime Minister through the royal prerogative. But if they have no power, why are we keeping them?
Because it's that figurehead, right? It's that unifying figurehead. You get these wonderful moments when the country comes together and, you know, can throw a party. We don't need Eurovision for that. We've got the monarchy.
Yes, well, Con, you started the programme, my viewer there, saying, is there anything positive going on? There you go, yes. You can have a party, can't you? The coronation. Are you going to have street parties? I will be up in Hull for the actual coronation, but we will be near Buckingham Palace, at Buckingham Palace, I should say, next week. What a treat for us, everyone. I hope you're going to join us there.
Well, I hope you haven't got the Republican with you.
Yeah, I'm taking the guillotine with me.
I'm going to ban him. Ali says, where are all these surveys come from, by the way? I've never been asked. Ali, you are a woman after my own heart. I've never been asked in a poll about anything ever. Anyway, look at the time it flies when you're having fun. Thank you, guys. I've enjoyed today. Thank you at home for your company. Have a fantastic weekend, and I'll see you on Monday.
Hello again, welcome to the latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. A warmer weekend for many of us, sunny spells, but also some heavy showers developing each day. Those showers will be hit and miss and affect different parts of the UK on different days. But we've got low pressure moving away for the time being. That's left a legacy of cloudy skies for Friday, and into Friday evening the cloud tends to thicken. If anything, it will lower, it will cover the hills in places. There'll be some mist around western coasts as well, and some outbreaks of rain affecting the Grampians and the Highlands with snow over the hills. It's going to stay cold in the far north of Scotland, but elsewhere a milder night to come. And whether you've got the clear skies or the cloud, it's going to be around 8 to 10 Celsius first thing. Then on Saturday morning, a fairly dreary start to the day, actually. A lot of low clouds, some mistiness around western coasts. But inland, as temperatures rise, the cloud will lift. It will brighten up. There'll be some sunshine coming through. However, as temperatures rise, especially for Northern Ireland, parts of Wales, the West Midlands, there could be some slow-moving showers, some thunderstorms and some hail. So watch out for those during Saturday afternoon. Away from those areas, actually, Scotland and Northern England stay cold and generally grey, but mostly dry. And towards the southeast, we'll see some warm sunshine. But into Saturday night, most places turn cloudy once again. And as the cloud thickens up from the west, bringing with it mist and murk, we'll also see outbreaks of rain. On and off rain, yes, but nevertheless, a fairly wet start to Sunday across western parts of the UK, especially western Scotland, where it's going to be persistent first thing. And as that rain moves northeastwards, it's going to stay damp across the north of Scotland through much of the afternoon. Elsewhere, the rain breaking up into showers, and there'll be some slow-moving downpours once again, especially northern and western England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Monday's showers mainly affect the southeast. It's going to be warm again.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News. We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The coronation is an event that has remained virtually unchanged for 1,000 years.
And we invite you to join us here on GB News for this historic event.
All next week, we'll be talking to you in towns and cities across the country.
Building up to the main event on Saturday.
From pageantry at the palace to unearthing the history of this ancient ritual.
Come celebrate with us.
The coronation of King Charles III, Saturday, May the 6th. Join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good evening, it's 7 o'clock and I am Lawrence Fox. First up, has the cancel culture of the left finally infiltrated the Conservative Party? Andrew Bridgen has been brutally cancelled. Usually it's the Blue Hair Brigade that are terrified of free speech, but have the Conservatives become infected with the woke mind virus as well? Then, stories of the week. Richard Sharp has stepped down from the BBC after yet another report, investigation and cancelling. Prince William is more popular than King Charles amongst the young, and speaking of the young, will they ever be able to buy a house? And finally, and most importantly, I want to hear from you. So send me your views my way at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at Loza Fox. That's all coming up after headlines with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Lawrence. Your headlines this evening. The Deputy